Raised in Mansfield, Ohio, Mr. Brown began his career developing curricula and conducting teacher training seminars for the Ohio State University. His political career began with his election to the Ohio House of Representatives in 1974, and to win that seat, he canvassed an entire district and personally visited more than 20,000 homes. Since then, Mr. Brown has been one of this state's most dedicated public servants. He served as Ohio's Secretary of State, and in 1993, his district sent him to the nation's capital to serve in the United States House of Representatives. The hallmark of Senator Brown's political career is the pride he takes in being known as an elected official who listens to his constituents and who maintains the principles that he promotes. In Ohio and in Washington, Senator Sherrod Brown has earned a reputation as a public official who looks to the future. But as I said at the beginning of this evening's program, I think it's fair to say that this evening we can demonstrate, because of his suggestion that we take on this challenge, that he's also a man who values and honors the past. It's a privilege to introduce our United States Senator.
Rabbi, thank you. It's just an honor to be here, particularly with Dr. Heschel, but with all of you and the American Jewish Archives. And Rabbi Zola, thank you so much for doing this and for just the whole evening. It was so moving. I loved the story when the postal worker said, "You are welcome," to her father. I mean, I loved a lot of her stories, but that one particularly hit me. Thank you to all of you. To Barbara Glick, thank you for your work, and to Lisa, thank you for helping put this together. Bishop Brown, nice to see you again, and thank you for being part of this. And Rabbi Ellenson, nice to see you. And one other introduction I would like to make. There's a young man here. As Rabbi Zola said, I knew of Rabbi Heschel, but I didn't know nearly enough, and I didn't know of his connection to Cincinnati until I read an article in the New York Times about him, and then spoke with both Bishop Brown and Rabbi Zola later about it. But I've gotten some of my education about Rabbi Heschel has come from a young man from Akron who is here, and Josh Volnick is sitting here, and if Josh would stand for a moment. Josh's father and I are good friends, and he lives in Akron also. And Josh has written extensively about Rabbi Heschel, and Josh's son is named Heschel. So you should know that. So you will want to meet him afterwards. But thank you for continuing the education that way. I've read this book as many of you have, I think, and I was taken by the essays, and there were interviews at the end, also a little later in his life of Rabbi Heschel. And there's just a wonderfully poignant discussion in the foreword, in the foreword or whatever at the beginning, introduction by his daughter, by Dr. Heschel, about her father, written 10 years or so ago, right? And I was especially struck by her description of her father's reaction to discrimination in this book, her father's reaction to discrimination against women. And there was this, imagine this pious, religiously conservative man, a man who had descended from 7 generations, as Susannah said, of Hasidic rabbis encouraging Susannah to apply to the male-only rabbinical school at the Jewish Theological Seminary. And so I look at Susannah now. I wish her father could see her now. And as a father of 3 daughters myself, I can't help but think that you are the legacy of which your father would be so very proud.
We would have thanked
thank you for that.
Reunion College.
Good point. It takes my line away from me. No, I was thinking when I said it. Last Saturday I was at a very difficult funeral service for Stephanie Tubbs Jones, an African American congresswoman from Cleveland. And after when Rabbi Zola stood up and said, I was speaking right after Dr. Heschel, the first thing that ran in my mind was, I was one of Stephanie and my wife and I were very close friends and had her house for dinner, and we were very close friends, and it made this service that much harder. But there was a line of very distinguished speakers at this service, and way more distinguished than I, and I spoke right after Hillary Clinton and right before Barack Obama. And it's like, why me? So then that was Saturday, and today is, whatever today is, Wednesday, and I got to speak after Dr. Heschel. So how fair is this? When I think about, I love history, and my Lutheran faith is particularly important to me, and my interest in the Hebrew Bible, my interest in the New Testament, all of that really comes together this evening in so many ways. And I think back to, not my first trip to Israel. My first trip to Israel was I went backpacking and swam in the Dead Sea and didn't know anybody was. And I was a state legislator, but nobody really cared. And but then my third trip to Israel was as a member of Congress with two friends of mine in Cleveland. One of whom escaped as an 8-year-old, escaped Poland. A fellow named Fred Rezepka, and just moved east. And I remember just went up into northern Russia and ultimately ended up going through Siberia out, sort of Vladivostok, Nakhodka, that area in eastern Russia, eastern Soviet Union. But I remember in that trip that it was we had a Canadian Jewish Israeli guide, and my two Jewish friends from Cleveland and I, just the four of us. And he took me around as they take all good Goya politicians to the historical sites and the religious sites. But he took me, one thing that really sort of crystallized my faith and understanding. And when I heard Dr. Heschel say, you can learn something about God from a Jew. As a Christian, I can learn something about God from a Jew. And I so distinctly remember we were standing one day with this guide and my two friends from Cleveland at the top of the hill that supposedly from where Jesus delivered the Sermon on the Mount. And we had talked about Judaism, we had talked about my Lutheran faith, Christianity generally, and before that, and we're standing there, and I'm looking out at the water, and he hands me the New Testament open to Matthew 5, the Sermon on the Mount, and I just remember that was one of the most meaningful moments of my life, just kind of drinking in sort of Judeo-Christian heritage and the history and the religion of these two great religions that have come together in so many ways and in so many good ways, not always good ways, but so many good ways. And as I've gotten older, I've understood more and more that my faith is not always the final word from God, and that we all, I'm not preaching to anybody, but that it's always tested. I always think about it, and I don't always come up with the right conclusions, but I guess we all do our best. One thing, as I was reading that book, I took some notes a few weeks ago when I first read it. And there was a letter that Susannah's father, that Rabbi Heschel wrote to JFK, and about 6 months before he died, he wrote, "We forfeited." She really alluded to this in a more general way. He said, "We forfeit the right to worship God as long as we continue to humiliate Negroes." And he really did understand in so many ways what the great rabbis taught, what the great leaders of all faiths taught. And one of my favorite quotes I came across years and years ago came from Maimonides when he said, "One should see the world and see himself as a scale with an equal balance of good and evil. When he does one good deed, the scale is tipped to the good. He and the world are saved. When he does one evil deed, the scale is tipped to the bad. He and the world are destroyed." And I think that Rabbi Heschel said similarly, 6-7 centuries later, "A prophet's a man who's able to hold God and man in one thought. When I heard a human being, I heard God." And I think he had that view of the world, that belief in his faith, that faith, that belief in the goodness of humankind. And as Dr. Heschel said so well about her father, what we all need to strive for, and that we all need to look for the good in humanity. And I would just close with a story out of that book that just told me everything. It was an interview with Carl Stern in 1973, and you know the story I'm going to say. And I will just read the story briefly as he told it. "The biggest message of the Bible, of the prophets of Israel, is that God takes man seriously. You remember God created Adam and Eve, and they immediately failed. He was disappointed, but he kept them alive. Then they gave birth to 2 boys, very nice boys." You can see him just saying very nice boys. "I'm sure they got some very excellent education, certainly in a good environment. They didn't live in the slums, you know." And he had a sense of humor, clearly, too. And I had a good Jewish mother who was a Methodist, but a good Jewish mother too. So. They didn't live in the slums, and you know what one brother did to the other. God should have been disgusted. He said, "No, I will keep the human species alive. I'm waiting. Maybe someday there will be a righteous generation." And throughout history, as seen by the Bible, there's one disappointment for God after another. But he's still waiting for a mankind that will live by justice and compassion. He's in search of man. Thank you.
I'm honored to introduce my friend, Bishop Lynn Brown, who is the resident bishop in Cincinnati for the Ohio, Central Indiana, and Kentucky regions of the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church. Bishop Brown is elected the 46th bishop of the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church in 1986 in Birmingham, Alabama. And upon his election as bishop, he was then assigned to the 9th Episcopal District, which encompassed the states of California, Arizona, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Oregon, Washington, and the Alaskan regions. So you see, after that training experience, he was ready to come to Cincinnati. Bishop Brown is one of the outstanding leaders of the CME Church, and indeed he is, if you know anything about the Cincinnati community, one of our community's most distinguished leaders and most distinguished national leaders. The list of national organizations he serves is much too long for me to read this evening, but I want to mention one or two. For example, he is a member of the National Life Membership Committee of the National Board of Directors of the NAACP. He's a national board member and regional vice president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He is a member of the board of directors of the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center. And here in Cincinnati, the bishop is currently the chair of our Martin Luther King Jr. Coalition. This is how we became friends. This is a volunteer organization, Friends, that plans and executes our city's annual commemoration for Martin Luther King Day. The centerpiece is a program that takes place at Music Hall. I will simply stop at this quick point to insert that it's very clear to me that the bishop's youth, his early years in the civil rights movement, is where he first encountered the Jewish community. And thankfully, he encountered members of our community who would make us proud. That doesn't have to be the case, as you well know. And on account of that, the bishop never stops remembering those good deeds, and he reminds our community all the time of that, and for that we are always grateful. Although the bishop's organizational and communal attainments are so considerable, those who know him best will assure you that he is at the core a man of faith. He's a dedicated teacher, a brilliant speaker, a loving pastor to his people. And the hallmark of this man's entire ministry has been and is community activism, which began during the civil rights era in the 1960s. Like Rabbi Heschel, it could be said that Bishop Brown, too, literally marched with Dr. King. It's a privilege to welcome to the podium Bishop Lynn Brown.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Zoller. One of my great friends, Charles Adams, the distinguished pastor of Hartford in Detroit, said it's always be good to be wonderful to be introduced by a friend, because your enemies may tell the truth about you. So I just want to thank Dr. Zoller for his marvelous work, for his engagement in the city, and I want to thank the distinguished president of the school, Dr. Ellenson. Give him a hand. And of course, you should be proud because you have one of the best deans in the world, Dr. Ken Ehrlich. When I look out and see you, the wonderful, marvelous friends who happen to be Jews, my mind goes back across the colors of history and I pitch my mental tent. And this little story, there was a man who bought a bird that cost $10,000. The bird spoke 8 languages. 8 languages. $10,000. So he could not accompany the bird home, so he sent the bird to his mother's house. He was going to come there for Thanksgiving, so he could not come. He sent the bird. And he couldn't get there until Christmas. So when he arrived in the city and he got into his mode of transportation, got to the door, dismounted, and rang the doorbell, came to the doorbell, he spoke to his mother, and he caressed his mother, and he said, "Hi, mother." He said, "Oh, mother, how is that bird? How is that bird?" She said, "It was delicious." He said, Mother, don't you know that bird cost $10,000 and spoke 8 languages? She said, "You should have said something." So when I'm in the house with these marvelous, outstanding friends who happen to be from the Jewish tradition, somebody ought to say something. It was Victor Hugo who once said that nothing is so powerful as an idea whose time has come to be born. And thank you, Senator Brown, because the time has come to be born when we should dive off into the history of Judaism and reclaim this marvelous, the writings and the teaching of this marvelous man. He was great, he was wonderful, he was scholarly, and he was holy. So let's give him a hand. Thank you very much. He's a great senator. He's such a great senator. When I saw him and saw his name was Brown, I looked at him and I said, "Good God, I finally met my old master." It is true that we should recapture and reclaim the greatness of this man. But as she spoke, I sort of instantaneously did a comparative analysis in the deep residuum of my mental skies while she was speaking. And his life and Dr. King's life so inextricably intertwined. When he talked about the difference between good and evil. And Dr. King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. They were very closely related. Both of them had a tremendous amount of faith. And faith for Dr. King was a qualitative leap of faith, who said, "Come stand with me on the bridge of faith and I will show you God." And this is the kind of faith that Dr. Heschel had. For a man to have been born in Poland and to have witnessed the death of his family and finally made his way over here, I want to tell you that that is some man. And I believe that somewhere from the portals of heaven, he's looking down upon us and his wonderful daughter, and he's smiling. Give her another hand. I just believe that. I believe that. But not only did they have faith in common, they had engagement in common. Both of them engaged what Martin Luther King calls the 3 interlocking cruelties of this world: racism, poverty, and violence. And both of them engaged those things as they marched together. As I dived off into the historicity of this man, I knew, it came back to me. This is the man that Martin Luther King talked about so often. This is the man that he told us after they marched together in Selma. He said, "Thank you very much. You have meant so much to us." And I want to take this time to look you in the eye. To those of us who were involved in the civil rights movement, I want to tell you that you gave your money, you gave your blood, you gave your sweat and your tears. I can remember when we were down in Mississippi, there was a little Jewish girl from San Francisco, and there was a fellow from San Francisco. His name was Fred. Her name was Liz. She had a Freedom House in Indianola, Mississippi. and they came and burned the Freedom House. And Liz went over to an African-American lady's store and started another Freedom House in there. And Fred went into the sheriff's house. The sheriff rode in the church. They had one of those large churches. They rode the horses into the church, dragged us out of the church. And it was Fred who said, I know, I have met with the sheriff. Not the sheriff, the city man, policeman, police chief. Because the sheriff came out with his gun that night and said, I'm going to kill every nigger in here. And it was Fred who told the sheriff, said, no, John did not say what you think he said. And we were saved that night because one of my Jew friends made that statement. And not only that, I was living in Memphis and pastoring in Memphis. And Fred rode with me back to Memphis, spent the night at my house. And we left the next morning going back to Indianola. So I want to look you in the eye and say, thank you, Jews, what you have done for us. Give yourselves a hand. Give yourselves a hand. Thank you very much for what you've done. But not only that, Dr. Heschel was a universalist. Dr. King was a universalist. So he transcended even Zionism sometime. He said that Zionism was not an end in itself, but it was the essence of the religious aspect of the Jews. And he said we did not inaugurate it, but it's an inheritance. God, it is a gift of God. And when anybody tries to subsume the Old Testament or try to talk to me about the Jews, they got trouble coming for me. And I want you to know that because I love you. I'll be honest with you. You see how closely Rabbi Zola and I, but not only that, how many remember Rabbi Wolf out in Los Angeles? How many remember Rabbi Wax out of Memphis? How many remember Rabbi Saul out of California? All of these were wonderful persons, and the remembrance of them shall forever be engraved upon the tablets of our hearts. And I say to you, as I prepare to take my seat, what is it that we can do together? Well, we can work together continuously because it sickens me to my stomach when I hear anybody makes any kind of disparaging remarks about the Jewish people because they have meant so much to us and they have done so much for us. Don't stop doing it now. But they've done so much for us. You know, Charles Beard, I know it's dark out there now, and Charles Beard, the great historian, someone asked him as his eyes had sunk in his head, his hair had turned gray, he was on a cane, and they said, Charles Beard, what are the three things that you have learned from history? He raised his head and he said, son, the three things I have learned from history is that first of all, the mills of God grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly small. He said, the second thing I have learned from history, those whom the gods would destroy, they must first make mad with power. He said, the third thing I learned from history is that the bee that robs the flower also fertilizes the flower that it robs. But the fourth thing I've learned from history is when it is dark enough, you can see the stars. It may be dark now in our society, it may be dark in our world, but if we tie our ropes together and work together, Jews, blacks, and other people, we can look up and see the stars in spite of the darkness. Then we can echo the words of that great Abraham, Joshua, Heschel, who said, echo eternity.
Dr. David Ellenson is the 8th president of this historic Hebrew Union College, now in its 133rd year. He serves on the faculty as well. He is the I.H. and Anna Gransell Professor of Jewish Religious Thought. This school's Board of Governors, its faculty, and its student body respect and admire our president, who is a distinguished rabbi, a fine scholar, and a great leader of American Judaism. He is internationally recognized for his scholarship, his publications and research, which center in the area of Jewish religious thought, ethics, and modern Jewish history. I know I am speaking for all of us at the college, though that's a risky thing to do, but in this case, we all take pride in the fact that this past May, Dr. Ellenson's alma mater, William and Mary College in Williamsburg, Virginia, honored our president with an honorary doctorate degree. Since his ascension to the presidency of the College Institute in 2001, Dr. Ellenson has dedicated himself tirelessly, selflessly, day after day, to securing and safeguarding the future of this historic institution, and I'm saying most pointedly of his interest and love for this campus and its future. And this remarkable expansion that's going on all around us on the Cincinnati campus is a testament to his extraordinary success. And I don't think there's any finer way than to say that and bring him to this podium, the president of the College Institute, David Allen.
I will confess, Senator Brown, speaking after Hillary Clinton and then before Senator Obama is certainly a daunting task. And after all, speaking tonight after Susannah Heschel's words, I have heard Dr. Heschel speak on a number of occasions. There is a rabbinic phrase, Devarim sheyotzim min halev nichnasin el halev, words that come out of the heart of the speaker, enter into the hearts of those who listen. Your words tonight were not only remarkably challenging in an intellectual sense, but the passion with which you addressed us and the sentiments you expressed on a personal level made tonight, in my view, the most memorable address that I think I have ever heard you deliver, almost anyone, anywhere, I would say, about your father. And it was really, if I can say this as a rabbi, and if the minister, bishop will allow me to, I think we could even say it was a blessing in that sense. So I really do want to thank you for being here tonight. Years ago, I had mentioned to Senator Brown, Esquire magazine ran a feature, and the question that was asked was it too much to expect the Congress of the United States to be literate? And I will allow you to check in the archives of that Esquire magazine a number of years ago when you can draw your own conclusions. The fact, Senator Brown, that you have initiated this evening because of your discussion with Dr. Zola and with Bishop Brown, and the intellectual and religious integrity and curiosity that you show and that you bring to your position in the United States Senate, frankly honors and enhances not only the state of Ohio, but it actually elevates all of us. So I would really express my deepest thanks to you for being responsible for what really is an extraordinary evening. Bishop Brown. I needed to say a few words in between because I wasn't really quite certain how I could indeed follow the passion and the morality and ethics that you expressed in your words. And to you, I can only say from the bottom of my heart and soul, thank you so very much for your presence in our community and your words to us tonight. To Dr. Gary Zola, I can only say that Dr. Marcus would be very, very proud to be here tonight. And within Jewish tradition, there is the notion of hidardaruta dorot, that there is the decline rather than the elevation of generations. And yet the rabbis point out that in each generation we stand on the shoulders of giants, and therefore even if we are not, in quotes, as great as they are, we are able to see, as it were, even farther because we stand on their shoulders. I think, Gary, you have quite a stature yourself, and you have really stood on Dr. Marcus's shoulders and created a great and admirable institution which we look forward to growing even more in so many ways in the years to come. So thank you. I have found tonight, as I know many of you have, terribly, terribly moving, and I am going to ask just your indulgence for a couple of moments. Because in standing here tonight, I want to talk a little more autobiographically than perhaps I had intended for a few moments. And to say to you, Susannah, what it is that I think, as a 61-year-old man, your father meant to many rabbis of my generation who elected to enter the Hebrew Union College, the Jewish Theological Seminary, in the late 1960s and early 1970s. I grew up in Tadwater, Virginia, Newport News. My life, my soul is intertwined with that region of the world. Indeed, it is often odd for me when I think about the direction that my life took that I really do not think I could have ever imagined as a child that I would have become a rabbi. And certainly, I will confess, as someone who grew up in an Orthodox Jewish tradition, would put it rather mildly to say that I would never have imagined that I would have become a Reform rabbi, and it only demonstrates the sense of humor that God has, that she has led me in a way that I have become the president of this particular institution. But the reality is I grew up in a world where struggles over integration were at the very center of my being and my existence. My grandparents immigrated from Eastern Europe to Tadwater, Virginia in the early 1900s. And a great many members of my family still live there. My cousin Myra has been the mayor of Virginia Beach, Virginia for the last 18 years. She's up for re-election this year. She was not selected to be vice president. Of the United States. But I think back to the world in which I grew up. It was a world of really strict segregation. Bishop Brown alluded before to some of the sensibilities of that era in the 1950s and 60s. I grew up where there was separate seating for blacks and whites. In fact, there were not blacks in the world I grew up in, nor African Americans. There were, in polite company, either Negroes or colored. The movie theaters in Newport News had separate seating for colored and white. If you were white, you could sit in the front of the bus. If you were colored, you sat in the back of the bus. There was no school integration at the age of 9. I will never forget the governor of Virginia, William Tuck, this is one of my earliest memories, said that school integration could be compared to sprinkling coal dust on vanilla ice cream. It ruined the ice cream and rendered the coal dust unfit for any kind of use. That was, as it were, the world in which I grew up. Senator Harry Flood Byrd and Willis Robertson were our senators. Senator Byrd was the political boss of the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, to be exact, when I was a boy growing up. He created a policy of massive resistance. Virginia had the distinction of being virtually the only place in the Western world at a certain point outside of certain areas in South Africa that in some counties actually did not have a public school system. Senator Byrd enunciated a policy of massive resistance to integration, which meant close schools rather than integrate them. As a boy, I remember the students from Hampton Institute and others. I was 11, 12 years old, marching on Woolworths, Grants, and other places to engage in integration. The world in which I grew up was a world in which civil rights, or the struggle for civil rights, was certainly central to my very consciousness. The great hero in my home was a man named Lindsey Almond Jr., who was the governor of Virginia, elected in 1958. He had been hand-selected by Senator Byrd to become the governor of Virginia. He had been the attorney general. He was from Roanoke. And much to everyone's shock, as soon as he was inaugurated as governor of Virginia, he said that he felt compelled morally to obey the Constitution of the United States as interpreted by the United States Supreme Court, and he renunciated this policy of massive resistance. He never held elective office in the Commonwealth of Virginia again, but Governor Almond, in the home in which I grew up, when we talk about discussions, was at the very center of, in my father's opinion, what it meant to be, in quotes, a profile in courage. I had been a page boy in the Virginia State Senate in 1962 and 64. I was page boy at the Democratic National Convention to the Virginia delegation. I had always thought that my life was actually going to become much like that of my cousins, who instead of going to the College of William and Mary, where they sent the boys in our family, attended Stern College, the women's part of Yeshiva University in New York City. She may be the only Mayor Oberndorf from Stern College who has ever been the mayor of Virginia Beach, Virginia. The religious tradition in which I grew up, however, was a religious tradition that emphasized almost exclusively ritual behaviors. And I did not know, I will confess, in my teenage years, Rabbi Heschel, and I did not know that religion addressed, quite frankly, issues of values. I knew that religion addressed issues of ritual behavior. Of that I had absolutely no doubt. And in light of the words of Bishop Brown and Senator Brown here tonight, and certainly Susannah Heschel in her work, it was actually taking a course my senior year in college in contemporary Christian thought in light of this background that actually changed the whole direction of my life Jewishly. I was fortunate to have a professor who was a graduate of Kenyon College, James Livingston, who then attended Union Theological Seminary, received a Master of Divinity degree, and then received his PhD at Columbia University in religious thought. And I took a course in contemporary Christian thought with him. This was in 1968-69. By this time, I knew who Rabbi Heschel was. And Professor Livingston, in this class in contemporary Christian thought, said that what had drawn him to religion was that when he looked at all the great moral leaders of our day, and he mentioned Dr. King, he mentioned Reinhold Niebuhr, and he mentioned Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. He said all of these people were informed by religion. And he believed, as I later learned, Rabbi Heschel said that while we affirm the notion that religion and state should be separated, we completely reject the notion that religion and the human situation should be separated. That religion has to address the very deepest elements of our souls, and it compels us to work in the world. And in seeing the role that Rabbi Heschel played and in hearing his words, which I always understood as a commentary upon the rabbinic phrase, Da lifnei mi ata omed, know before whom you stand. And this I say particularly looking to our students here. It is vital, and now I quote Rabbi Heschel, to know how to stand before God. It is vital to know how to stand before God. And what it is that I hope for the students who leave this school and are ordained in this institution is that you take that message with you and that you challenge the people whom you will come to love and to nurture, but who will also look to you for moral leadership, so that each of you will know that each human being is a question mark that God addresses over and over again to humankind, and the way in which you behave in the world and the way in which you respond to the spiritual and moral challenges of our day represents the answer which God has posed in your life. For as Rabbi Leo Beck put it once, in a vein I think quite similar to Rabbi Heschel, people are not simply born into the world as if by fate, but God calls us to the task of molding and creating community. There is no one who did that more than Rabbi Heschel. Rabbi Heschel provided for me, and I could go back and look at the essay that I wrote when I applied to HUC, and I think for dozens and dozens of people who elected to go to rabbinical school during that era, what Rabbi Heschel embodied and represented for us was that Jewish religious tradition could be relevant, that one could observe mitzvot ma'asiyot, one could observe ritual behaviors, but that ultimately Judaism extended far beyond ritual behaviors and compelled us ultimately to act in the world. And the power of that model, and in listening to Susannah speak tonight, what Rabbi Heschel ultimately embodied was a response. His life was a response to that question, how is it that my life can have significance? And for that reason, we come here tonight to honor him. A United States Senator takes note of him. A bishop who walked with Reverend King applauds him. A daughter walks in his footsteps and rightfully adores and echoes him. That is a legacy that is an enduring one. It is a legacy that lives. And it is for that reason that this evening, out of almost all the evenings that I can think of in the last 8 years, remains and is marked as one of tremendous, tremendous blessing, not only for this institution, but for the image of God as it can hopefully come to exist in the world. For that we thank Rabbi Heschel, and for that we are grateful for an evening like this in which we not only recall his legacy, but I think, as Rabbi Heschel would put it, and as Susannah reminded us tonight, that the real challenge and the real tribute that we pay to his legacy is not simply in listening to these words tonight, but ultimately what it is we do when we leave this place and how it is we help to engage in a repair of the world. Thank you.